my reminder to hit the record button. So there we go. We are now recording. And I'd like to welcome you to the May 2021 Virtual Quality Talk. As always, I will thank D2L for letting us use their corporate Zoom account for this meeting today. And a reminder, if you don't already follow us on Twitter, following our @KWSQA account is a great way to keep in touch with what's going on in the organization. And a big thanks to all of these wonderful people who do all the work behind the scenes to organize these events and keep the organization running. So that these are the members of your board for this year. Looking ahead to the near future, the next two talks that we've got lined up for you are shown on the screen here. On Wednesday, June the 23rd, and take note of that date because it's not the last Wednesday of the month, it's the second last Wednesday of the month, to put some distance between the Canada Day holiday that we have here in this country. So Wednesday, June 23rd, we're actually going to do a panel discussion. We haven't done a panel discussion in a while, so we're excited for that. It's going to be hosted by Rob Boyer, one of our board members, and we've got 4 great panelists lined up that we are excited to introduce you to. So stay tuned for more details on that. That's the June 23rd talk. And at the end of July, we've got Joel joining us to give us some insights on things that he thinks that we should keep doing even after we get back to the new normal. So also very excited to hear more about that in a couple of months from now. We do have some slots still available later in this calendar year, though. So if you've got an idea for a talk or you know somebody who might, we would love to hear from you. You can fill out our CFP form anytime at kwsqa.org. We are hoping to host a virtual testing games event in the coming month or so. We're still thinking we're going to try to get this coordinated for a Tuesday evening in June. But again, stay tuned for more details. We will hope to share those soon about exactly which Tuesday evening and what time and how you can join and all that. Another reminder that we do have our KWSQA memberships available for purchase now on our website. So why would you purchase one of these when all of our events right now are free and don't require a membership? Well, there's a couple of reasons. One would be just if you would like to support our organization. Obviously, with only running free events, we don't have an income stream right now. So we'd appreciate any support that you can provide. Also, if you live or work in our Waterloo region, purchasing a membership means that you become eligible to vote in our Board of Directors election that happens later this year. And it also means that you would become eligible to actually run in the Board of Directors election too. So those are some reasons why you might want to consider purchasing a membership. And how do you do that? Well, you simply go to our website and click this Buy Now button. If you run into any issues, let us know, but it's a pretty quick process. So our code of conduct is in effect for this event. It's the exact same as the one that we have always used in our in-person events. But if you have any questions about this at any time, please do reach out and we will help you out. So getting on to the good part, today's presentation, nothing super unexpected in terms of the overall agenda. We're going to have the presentation followed by some Q&A at the end. But one thing that's new this month is related to the feedback survey that you'll get in your email after this session ends. So we decided to institute a bit of a contest around submitting the feedback survey. We've really appreciated all the feedback that we've gotten in the last last few months from the people that are filling out the feedback survey. So much so that we decided we wanted to incentivize the rest of you to give us even more feedback. And so what we're going to do is anyone who fills out a feedback survey between now and our annual general meeting, which takes place towards the end of this year, will get an entry into a draw for a $50 Amazon gift card. So if you fill out the feedback survey for all of the meetings between now and then, you'll have multiple entries into this contest. So the details for that will be included in the feedback survey that you receive shortly after this meeting ends. And with that, I am ready to turn it over to our speaker for today. Ali is here. This is another great opportunity for us to bring you a speaker who is not local, who is actually quite far away from where I'm located. Ali is coming to you from Scotland today, and he's going to tell us a bit about how testers can help to promote continuous improvement in a team. And I know all of us on the board are really excited to hear his insights on this. Some of us have encountered him at other conferences in recent years and have always really enjoyed hearing what he has to say. So thanks, Ali, for being here today, and I will turn things over to you.
Thanks, Tina, and thank you very much for having me as well. Let me just share my screen. Cool. So you should be able to see my main slides. Just shout out if you can't. But yeah, I just wanted to say hi to everyone. Thank you very much for attending the session today, because I realise that it's probably lunchtime where most of you are just now. So I appreciate that people are taking the time out of their busy days to attend this. I'm going to be presenting a new talk that I've been working on. I've been working on it for the past couple of months, and I've titled it "Baking Quality In." But it's going to be focusing on how testers, or it actually applies to any role within your team, can help drive continuous improvement and a culture of quality within the team. So just a little bit about me. As Tina mentioned, I'm based in Scotland, if you couldn't tell by the accent, and I'm based in Edinburgh specifically. I began my career as a software tester, and I performed various testing roles as a games tester, automation engineer, and agile tester for over 5 years. And during that time, I began to focus on how testers can provide the most value to their development teams and to their company and customers by performing that role. I've most recently, over the past couple of years, moved into a consultant role. I find myself working as a DevOps consultant. My official job title is delivery consultant, but it doesn't really tell you much. So I'm just going to retitle myself as a DevOps consultant. And testing is still very much part of my role, but then so is developing software and writing infrastructure as code and so on. So what made me decide to talk about this topic? Because as I mentioned, I'm no longer in a specific testing role. So why talk about a quality focused topic about how team members can drive a quality culture within their team? For me, testing is still very much a passion of mine. I'm still involved in the local Edinburgh and the online testing community. And as I mentioned, as I became more experienced as a tester, I began to focus more on how testers can add value to teams. And it was still something that I was interested in as I became a DevOps consultant. And by becoming a consultant, I was able to see more and more teams almost treating their testers as afterthoughts. And at the same time, I saw testers treat the testing activity and carrying out the testing as their only role within the team. And I've seen this at large financial organizations where you would maybe expect that sort of siloed approach. But I've also seen it at smaller, more agile companies, places where I used to work as well. So the main reason for doing this talk is I think a lot of development teams and a lot of companies are still missing a massive opportunity by maintaining these traditional silos. And these silos exist, as I said, even within agile teams. So I wanted to share a combination of the activities that I performed as a tester, but also activities that I've seen other testers perform when I've been acting as a developer within a team. And it's the type of things that really help drive continuous improvement and a quality culture within our teams. So I've mentioned continuous improvement a couple of times, and it's in the subtitle of the talk, but what do I actually mean by that? And I think this diagram that I've taken from the PlanView website summarizes it quite well. So first, when we're practicing continuous improvement, we identify any opportunities in our workflow. Is there a part of the process that makes you angry or frustrated? Emotions can come into continuous improvement quite a lot. Does something take a long time to run? Are you performing a task that's adding no value? Maybe it's a repetitive task that's quite boring. You can raise this with your team and see if other people feel the same as you. The second stage is to plan an improvement. How can the current process be improved? Does the step need to be performed at all? Because you'd be surprised how many teams still perform steps and perform process steps for reasons like it's always been that way, without realizing that they no longer need to do it because the person who originally requested it has left the company. I've seen quite a few similar reasons like that. I think third, you then implement the changes that you've discussed, that you've planned. So work on either accelerating the process or tackling that process in a different way. Try out this implementation of the change for a sprint or two or a few weeks, just whatever you think is reasonable for your team to decide how long and whether that's going to be effective. And finally, you can get together as a team and review the changes that you've made. How are the changes working for the team that you're working on? Do people think it's an improvement? Do people think it's worked? Has it solved the problem completely, or is there another iteration to go before we decide that problem's been removed? And also, if you do define your team processes, I know some teams do, then should it become a defined part of the team's process or the team's standards? So by making small changes through practicing this continuous improvement, teams can really improve their efficiency. One thing that our current team does is make a note of the changes that we've made using this continuous improvement cycle, because it's good for us to reflect back on the small changes that we've made and how they really add up. And yeah, it's also good evidence for managers and for team leads, just to show that the team isn't just focused on delivering quality software, they're also focusing on developing quality processes within the team. So I want to start by talking about some of the common problems I've seen that prevent teams from being able to develop a quality culture or practice continuous improvement. First, yeah, there's a lack of focus sometimes on actually practicing continuous improvement, the process I described in the previous slide. Sometimes teams continue to go through the motions and not reflect on what they're doing and why, and that leads to the team stagnating, basically. They're not going to make any improvements by doing that. And I get that it's obviously difficult to get buy-in to work on your team's processes, especially when you've got deadlines, you've probably got mountains of tickets to work on. So sometimes work is required to do research and describe the cost of the problem. For example, if I was in a team where our test suite currently takes 4 hours to run every time a build is pushed to the test environment, then yeah, if that took 4 hours to run, but if we worked on running it in parallel, it would only take 20 minutes. Then it'd be a lot easier to get buy-in from the business when you're putting that time and cost values on the problems that you're seeing. And sometimes getting tangible costs is difficult. But if you put that effort in, then you've got more evidence to back up getting that time to practice continuous improvement. The next thing I've experienced myself is testers or the testing activity still operating in silos. And this can happen for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it can be, it's quite rare, but sometimes it can be down to testers themselves not willing to embrace new ways of working and new technologies. But most of the time, in my experience, it's down to developers and other roles not seeing the true value in getting involved in the testing activity. It's really hard for you to show the value of testing and the true value that testers bring to the team when people may not be interested in learning about it. And by not having everyone engage with this part of the software development lifecycle, I think the teams are missing out on a huge opportunity to improve their processes. So the next point is related to the above, but I often see testing being pushed into the very end of the development lifecycle, rather than being carried out throughout the development process. And it creates a bit of a nasty atmosphere because it leads to testers being pressured into writing tests when deadlines or end of sprints are looming. And how can people expect the people writing and executing tests, carrying out exploratory testing, how can people expect them to produce quality work when this is the circumstances they're working in, when they've got that pressure every single time? And I remember before a big product release in a previous company, I was asked to estimate how long it would take to test 2 days before the release was due to go out. So what they were really asking me was to commit to testing this within a 2-day period. There was no real flexibility there. And this bottleneck becomes a problem, and it can cause tensions between different roles within the team, because, for example, if I'm getting asked how long it'll take to test this, and when we start developing, developers weren't asked the same question, it can cause a bit of tension there. And I also find that there's often a lack of opportunities for testers to embrace new tools and new technologies. So this is sometimes caused by testers not being invited to meetings on talking about the team's CI/CD pipelines, for example. But it can also come down to testers not getting the same training as developers. So another example I've got is that I've been at a company where developers or people with a developer role job title have been given access to a cloud learning platform. We'd recently moved to Microsoft Azure, and they got a learning tool, whereas none of the testers got that license. So that really becomes an issue, a sort of training issue. So obviously at the end of that slide, I've included a couple of cultural and issues that I sometimes like to rant about. I don't know if you can tell, I quite enjoy talking about the problems. But what I'd really want to focus on in this talk is how can we solve this? How can testers or anyone in the team do their best to help solve this issue? And like I said, this can apply to testers. A lot of this talk is aimed at testers, but it can apply to anyone within the team who wants to advocate for testing or continuous improvement. So I'm going to be talking about a few ideas that I'd like to share, starting with our favorite topic, automated testing, before moving into CI/CD pipelines, DevOps principles, and finally moving back to talk about continuous improvement and how we can continue to challenge what we believe to be wrong. So yeah, let's start with our favorite topic of automated testing. The first thing I'm going to suggest might sound controversial or even sound unrealistic at first, but have developers write tests. Developers aren't going to be able to magically start work one day and write all of the automated integration and end-to-end tests as well as doing what they do every day. But by working with developers and having them think about the tests which are going to be run in the pipeline, it's really important. Because I spoke about one of the problems that I see with development teams is testers being siloed and therefore becoming a bottleneck. And one of the ways to get around this is to almost become a test coach or a test advocate. Because you can talk about a bug that has been caught in production or caught before it hit production, and then talk about the test you wrote due to that bug that you found or prevented, or the test that you performed, because it doesn't have to just be limited to automated testing. I think it's important to be proud of what you do as a tester. And from my experience, other roles are often impressed and intrigued by passionate testers who can talk about the value of what they do and how they can prevent issues like this from occurring again. So offer to sit down with developers and pair on writing unit tests or integration or UI tests, or even carry out exploratory testing. Use it as an opportunity to talk about the behavior of the functionality the team's working on. And in my experience, developers love to code and learn new things. Most of my experience kind of backs up that writing automated tests into a new integration or UI testing framework is no different. So once they get hands-on with the test repository and add an automated test to it, they'll feel more comfortable doing it in the future. And also by doing this, you're making testing visible. So something that used to be siloed is now getting worked on together between the tester and the developer. And as well as becoming more familiar with the code, the developers becoming more familiar with the test code, there are other benefits. You're actively coaching developers on how to test. When you're talking about what tests you're adding into your test suite and working on that with developers, you're thinking of the edge cases, the usual boundary tests that you would perform. And this can have a really subtle effect over time of kind of almost ingraining itself in a developer's mindset as well. And they'll begin to think like you were at that point if you keep repeating pairing sessions like this. And also by pairing on unit tests early, you're effectively building quality in its source. If you're thinking with the mindset you normally test with about boundary and edge cases, then you can catch these through unit tests before it's deployed to any development or test environment. So taking this idea a step further, begin to think about your testing ideas in your design. Begin to think and talk about them in your design and planning sessions with developers and the product people, either in your team or the product people who represent the product that you work on. And by coming to these sessions with tests in mind, you can begin to ensure that everyone's on the same page about what it is that you're going to be developing and what that functionality or behavior looks like. I personally love BDD. I think it's got a lot of power to challenge people's ideas of requirements and of their assumptions early on in the process, and also makes people's assumptions visible. People no longer have hidden assumptions about what it is they're going to be working on. It reduces that risk of people misunderstanding the requirements. So from these test ideas that you bring to these meetings and these conversations, you can start to define that through your code, through your tests. Your tests can define what the requirements are. Your tests, they essentially become the team's requirements. And this means that if any of your tests fail due to the behavior of the software, then something hasn't met the expectations. So whether you use a BDD testing framework like Cucumber or something like that, at this point, it doesn't really matter. For me, the real value provided is that by bringing test ideas to the design conversation and help challenge people's assumptions on what it is that's being developed, this helps prevent rework further down the development process. And it can accelerate the team's release rate. Because I know, speaking from my own experience, that we found so many bugs that myself and the developers didn't necessarily agree were bugs at first, and we had to go to the product person to talk about what the expected behavior was. So by having these sorts of conversations, by coming to the meeting with the tests that you're going to run or the tests that you're going to perform, it can help dispel a lot of those assumptions that people have. So the last point on automated testing is the metrics that you produce from your automated tests can almost start conversations on how to improve processes within your team. If you're tracking the number of tests that are passing and failing in each build, for example, then you can track trends on that. Obviously, in an ideal world, every single test will pass every time, but that's not always the case. So if you see a large number of tests fail in a single build, or a much larger than normal number of tests, then this should raise alarm bells in the team. The team will start asking why it's happened. Was this a misunderstanding of the requirements? Was there a problem in the test environment, for example, or was there a problem with how this was added into your CI/CD pipeline? These can be questions that you can ask to help perform the continuous improvement process that I discussed at the beginning of this. Also, how long does it take to run your test suite? If this is increasing drastically over time as you add more tests, then that can become an issue. Fast feedback is vitally important when it comes to running automated tests. You don't want developers in your team becoming distracted by other tasks. For example, if a test suite takes over 30 minutes to run. So you can set a threshold within your team, define the maximum acceptable time for your test suite to run. And when this threshold is exceeded, the team can sit down and talk about whether either any of the tests can be improved or whether some need to be run at all. Those tests can be deleted or removed from the suite straight away, or whether the tests need to be run with every single commit or push that a developer makes. So I really like the idea of using the metrics produced by your automated test suite to help guide conversations within your team and help you continually improve your processes, because I think you're probably running these tests anyway, but it's really good to look at the sort of the high level data that these tests produce. So the next area I'd like to talk about is getting involved in the design and the conversation around your team's CI/CD pipelines. Continuous integration, continuous delivery concepts, they've obviously been around for many years now. But I know the majority of the time that I was performing in the testing role, I was quite far removed from the team's process in this area. So I think it's really important for everyone in the team to learn what good practice looks like when it comes to continuous integration and continuous delivery. So these are two of my favorite resources I put in the links here. I put a link for Martin Fowler's article on continuous integration and Jez Humble and Dave Farley's book on continuous delivery. And these resources have been around for many years now, but I do find myself going back to them quite frequently because for me, they provide a really good base understanding of the main concepts and, more importantly, the main value of CI/CD as part of your team's process. And sometimes it's important to look at what the good practices are from these authors rather than focus on what's happening now and the way. And if you take a step back from what your team's doing, it means that you can reflect on whether what your team doing is actually following these good practices that are suggested by these experts. It's also valuable to be able to advocate for these good practices. Like I said, taking that step back and thinking about the direction your team's heading. So if, for example, you hear about your team talking about merge conflicts being an issue quite a lot of the time, you can ask, is your team committing to the same base branch every day, or ideally more frequently than that? But if not, why is that not happening? And if it's just a habit thing and it's something that can be changed relatively easily, so sometimes implementing a change like this can make a big difference to your team's productivity because it can reduce waste and the time spent debugging unnecessary issues such as two developers' code conflicting with each other because they haven't checked into the main branch for a week or so. Also, if you have a continuous delivery pipeline, how long does it take for a developer's code to be deployed to an environment where you can run some tests? Can a developer push a change, go get a cup of coffee, and then return to find the results from your tests? The idea of fast feedback is really important, and I mentioned it in the last slide, but it's not just important for developers, because if you want to know whether anything is fundamentally broken in the build by running your suite of automated tests, then you should be catching these issues as quickly as possible. If your pipeline process isn't quick, the people become fed up with it, and they naturally begin to cut corners or skip steps in the pipeline. And likewise, if you have long running or even worse, flaky tests in your pipeline, then it can lead to people ignoring anything that's raised by these tests. So just work with your team to implement these good practices. I think start off by having the conversations around what everyone thinks a good pipeline looks like. If you've got a pipeline, talk about what your pain points are and what you think works well. And start with the small changes, again, by practicing that continuous improvement cycle. And then slowly build on those changes. And it does take time because obviously people have day tasks and day jobs to focus on. But you can slowly build on those small changes that you make. So I discussed it a bit at the beginning, but I never used to get involved in discussions on CI/CD when I was a tester. Maybe that's just me, but also at that point, our CI/CD pipeline was actually developed by a team outside of my immediate development team. And I soon found out that the team that were working on this pipeline were open to ideas and suggestions, as well as me researching the articles that I've shared above. One of the best ways to learn for me is by listening, understanding, and then by doing. So get involved in the discussions around CI/CD. Don't be afraid to ask what we would, I don't know, some of us refer to as silly questions in inverted quotes. These questions are normally what prompts ideas in people's mind and can be catalysts for change. Because sometimes by asking the questions that you think are basic, it means that people need to be able to have a really clear answer for what it is or the reason for them doing something that way. And the more conversations you get involved in around CI/CD, the more confident you'll become and the easier it is for you to influence improvements to the team's CI/CD process. And perhaps the most obvious area where you can add immediate value to your team's CI/CD process is by discussing which tests to run in the pipeline. Where is it best for them to be run, and also when you should run them. So as a tester, you're probably used to having to making decisions with your team on whether to go ahead with a release or not. So what tests have you found that fail most often? Do they fail for valid reasons? i.e., are they genuine bugs? If so, then these are maybe the types of tests that should be run as early as possible in your pipeline, because it goes back to that idea of getting fast feedback. If you know that there's tests that fail quite a lot of the time because it's a messy area of the code and bugs can be introduced early, then you want to reduce that risk as soon as possible. So put your highest risk tests, or the ones that fail most often, as early as possible in the pipeline. Also, if you're not getting fast feedback, as in you're not getting fast feedback on your end-to-end tests, for example, they might take 30 minutes to run or longer than that, then do these tests need to be run every time? Could you potentially add a script to your pipeline that identifies which files have been changed by the developers and only run tests related to those files? Or could you run the non-critical long-running tests on a nightly build? It's just some of the things that you might want to think about when it comes to speeding up the tests and the pipeline process. So a lot of the reason that teams design CI/CD processes is to give them confidence in the code that they're releasing. And this should be no different for testers. The tests that run in your pipeline, if they pass, should give you some level of confidence that nothing is fundamentally wrong with the software you want to release. And that's the value of getting involved in the CI/CD process. So as we know, DevOps was introduced as a way to break down silos within organizations and bring teams closer, or make teams responsible for developing and operating their own software. And a lot of people talk about the benefits of DevOps in regards to combining tooling such as monitoring tools, CI/CD pipeline, infrastructure as code. But for me, the main value of DevOps, from what I've seen, is in how these tools facilitate bringing multiple roles closer together, and they lead to a more collaborative way of working. So how does that affect testers? So I believe it gives testers a massive opportunity to influence even more areas of the software development lifecycle. One of the things that I want to emphasize in this area is that breaking down any barriers that remain between roles is one of the most important things that we can do. It's not an easy task. Like I said, you've probably got a mountain of tickets to work on just now, but focus on the small things you can do. Be curious about the new tools and technologies you hear being discussed. And like I said, ask those basic or questions that you think are basic. You can be by doing this, you can be the catalyst for change in this area. And sometimes small 5-minute conversations with the people responsible for different areas of the software department can really help. So I'm going to talk about some of the ideas that I've seen over the past couple of years. So first of all, infrastructure as code is being adopted by a lot of teams. The ability to use tools such as Terraform or Puppet to deploy the infrastructure that hosts or supports your application is really exciting. And it's deemed as really good practice because this code can be stored in a code repository. Everyone can get access to it if they want to, and manual changes no longer need to be made on any of your production environments, for example. But also, despite the fact that it sounds great and it is a good practice, it introduces new risks by moving to infrastructure as code. So the first question I would ask is how is this code being tested? And also, does it need to be tested, or is running tests against your application that's running on this infrastructure, is that enough if the behavior of your software doesn't change? If someone in your company is writing infrastructure as code for the application that you're working on, it's worth having a conversation around what testing is happening and what common problems they face with infrastructure. Because sometimes the biggest risk to your application isn't the application code itself, but it can be the infrastructure it runs on. Is there anything that you can do as a tester to help mitigate that risk? Can you shift the tests further left, to use a popular phrase, to maybe test some of the Terraform code or the infrastructure as code, rather than waiting until something is deployed through the application? So if you've got, in my experience, we had a separate ops team responsible for monitoring our production environment. And I had the conversation with them about how I could get access to see any of the metrics from production. I ended up getting access to anonymized logs, and also we got alerts sent to our team if anything concerning was happening in our production environment. And previously we didn't have a view of this, which seems really silly looking back. But just by asking, we actually got access to that. We showed a curiosity there, and we got access to those metrics. And I've also seen a shift in the team's definition of done over the past few years to move from saying that tasks are done when they're ready for release or ready for deployment to now be considered done when they're released and running in production. And I think it's important to have some visibility of what you've just deployed. Most teams probably do have visibility of that, but it's really important to have that because it helps us identify whether things are working correctly for our customers. And when we see data or alerts, it allows us to begin to rectify issues as quickly as possible for customers. And we don't have to rely on customers getting in touch with us or an ops team getting in touch with us. So this is, again, kind of a follow on from the last point, but testing in production is something definitely worth exploring if you're not doing it already. Sorry, I'm not. Yeah, sorry. Testing in production is definitely something worth exploring if you're not doing it already. If we're having the right discussions about running our high-risk tests as early as possible in the pipeline, then what tests can we either push into production, or what tests can we also run in production? Because sometimes duplicating those tests can be quite valuable if they're non-intrusive and not going to cause any damage to the production environment. Because when we're running tests in production, it gives us confidence that what we've released is running correctly. And I'm not sure how many people on this call have experienced bugs in production that haven't been reproduced in any of your other staging or development or testing environments, because I know that I've encountered many like that were down to either the data of the environments or the database configuration themselves. So I think as software data environments, as it becomes more complex, it becomes harder to have a production-like environment. So sometimes having a suite of tests run against production on a regular basis can give you even more feedback about what you've released and give you confidence that your processes are working. So these are three areas of the sort of DevOps principles and practices that I've come across, but it can help give your team a wider view of your software and your processes. And it can help drive, by getting these metrics and by having these conversations, it can help drive the conversations that focus around continuous improvement. So I want to end the talk by talking about some general points. As testers, we're used to challenging ideas and assumptions about the software we're testing. And as valuable as that is, it's as valuable, or if not more valuable than this, to challenge the way that our team's processes and ways of working, if we challenge that in the same way, using that same mindset. So, for example, based on what I've shared today, can we get more out of our automated tests? Can we improve our CI/CD pipelines to give us more confidence? And are there any DevOps practices we can adopt to give us a wider view of our software and help us release with more confidence? It's also important that we ask questions and try to continuously improve. Celebrate the small changes that you make along the way, but definitely continue to challenge. Continue to ask some of the questions that maybe I've listed on this slide, such as why are we doing things this way? Is this a problem? Does this introduce any risk? And what are the potential improvements that we can make here with this process? But I think with this, challenging is definitely the way that teams are going to improve, when people challenge processes and when people identify flaws in processes. But I think it's also important that we pick our battles. People in general, I suppose, change needs to happen for a reason. If they don't immediately see that reason for the change happening, then they might become a bit agitated. And there's a chance that if people do become agitated, that you're touching the right nerve and you're on the right track. But it's also important to step back sometimes and maybe focus on something else in the process and revisit that area in the future. And the reason for that is that you're not going to be able to implement all of these changes yourself. Having an ally or allies in your team is very important, because changes like this are going to be in practicing continuous improvement is definitely a team effort. But in my experience, testers are amazing at challenging assumptions and asking the right questions. And it's amazingly valuable if you apply the same critical thinking to your team's processes in order to drive a culture of continuous improvement within your team. So before I get to the conclusion slide, I just want to share a technique which could help you practice continuous improvement. A few years ago, I undertook lean training, And this technique called the 3 C's was shared. And I've used it in multiple teams I've been in, and it's always been, at the very worst, relatively successful. The technique, yeah, as I said, is called 3 C's, and it stands for concern, cause, and countermeasure. And our team currently has this board with these 3 columns set up in Confluence, but you can use any tool that you want that can have multiple columns, or you could even, well, we're not in offices just now, but we used to have ours on a whiteboard as well. And the idea is that if you identify a pain point in your process or something that you think can be improved, then you raise a concern. This can then be discussed with the team in a weekly meeting where you discuss what's been added to the board. The team then works together, gets their thinking hats on to think about the root cause of the problem, quite often by asking why this is happening. And it's then up to the team to identify a potential countermeasure. So once this countermeasure is in place, the team can revisit this in a couple of weeks, or whatever sort of, you can define how often you want to review this board. And you can discuss whether it has truly removed the concern. If it has removed the concern, then it can be taken off the board or kept to keep track of what you've changed, or it can be re-added and maybe a new cause or a new countermeasure identified. And the value for me in this tool and this process is that it's constantly driving people to think of a solution to the problems being raised. For example, if I raise that our test suite takes 30 minutes to run, which is too long for our team, then we're instantly thinking about what is happening and asking questions such as, do they all need to be run? What value do some of these tests provide us? And then our countermeasure could be about reducing our test suite or running some tests separately or in parallel. And that's just one example of how the conversation focuses on solution. So quality culture affects everything the team does, and it doesn't just apply to software under development, but also to the team's processes. Here are some of the main points that I've covered in today's talk. So focus on how to bring developers closer to the testing activity, because this can really help build quality in its source. It can help challenge assumptions about the software's behavior, and it can also help provide metrics to help drive continuous improvement. Also, learn and advocate for CI/CD and DevOps practices and processes. Some of these will provide you with greater confidence in the software you're delivering and provide more visibility. And in general, continue to challenge and practice continuous improvement. So if there is a painful part in your team's process or something that doesn't feel quite right, then ask, why is it this way? And does it always have to be this way? So thank you very much for listening. And I believe we've got time for questions.
Awesome. Thanks so much. I've been like furiously typing notes while you're talking. Does anyone have a question they would like to ask?
I'm going to stop sharing if that's okay, so I can see people.
Yeah, sure.
Cool.
Or if you don't have a question, it might also be interesting to share just like what's an insight that you're going to take away from this talk, or what's something that you definitely want to try. I believe I have it enabled so that everybody can type in the chat, and everybody can unmute themselves as well. So feel free to use either method. For me, I know one idea that I definitely want to think more about is the idea of setting a kind of ceiling or a limit on what is the maximum acceptable time for our tests to take to run, and having that as a trigger point for a discussion of, okay, we need to talk about like, what are we going to do about this? Because I think otherwise it's too easy to just like, because it doesn't happen all at once, right? It's just like, oh, well, it's a little bit more now. It's a little bit more now. And then eventually you get to the point where you're just like, this is absolutely ridiculous, but you like, and then you need to make big sweeping changes. But if you could just keep a closer eye on it by having that checkpoint, I feel like that's a really great idea that I want to try.
Yeah, no, that's a really good one. I think that conversation is interesting because it actually once led us to completely splitting up and changing the architecture of our app, because we realized we're going to be adding so much more to it, and tests were going to need to be ran against it. So we actually split up, and it's more of a microservices architecture. We had smaller chunks instead of one big sort of application, and it just shows that the power of asking small questions. It can't really be overstated because it does get people thinking about it at a different level.
It's like a few things have come in the chat. Somebody who is going to use the 3 C's approach going forward. Couple people actually on that one. What else? What about maximum time for delivering a changed app? Yeah, that could be another good kind of trigger point for your team to discuss, like if your deployment pipeline is too slow, or yeah, like it would be kind of the same thing as with the test duration conversation.
Yeah. I think it's really difficult now because there's so many things that you could add into a pipeline, because there's all these tools that you've got security, you've got your maybe accessibility, performance, things like that. So like where do you draw the line? And what's most important to your team, I suppose, is the main question, and what needs to be ran each time, like actually really needs to be ran each time you create a build.
Yep. What else? We've got a question about, are there any other training resources that you might recommend for testers who are looking to gain a deeper understanding of CI/CD or even infrastructure as code? I guess you had recommended a couple of books, but maybe just continuing on those suggestions.
So for infrastructure as code, Terraform, I think, it's most popular in the places I've worked, but the HashiCorp website, who make Terraform, they have a couple of labs and stuff that you can run through. So they're really good resources. For CI/CD, let me have a think. I'm trying to think what else, because obviously continuous delivery is the big one, because that book just kind of describes everything. It talks about testing as well, but it describes everything sort of from end to end. I can't think of any other resources off the top of my head, but let me have a think about that. I'll reflect on that.
Okay. Also looks like there's a question in here about testing that's not automated. So we heard some great suggestions about how to manage and improve and continuously improve automated tests. What about, I don't know, do you have recommendations or suggestions on tests that aren't automated and how to make sure those are continually improving too?
Yeah, I kind of feel like actually I've done exploratory testing or manual testing a disservice in this talk, because we do a lot of it still, even though I'm talking about continuous improvement and accelerating the stuff that's automated. We always do exploratory testing on our environments, and at that point it does just become a manual gate for us just now. So we automate all the deployments and all that stuff. So developer pushes a button, then it's in the test environment. But then it's up to the person testing it to decide when they're comfortable, when they've ran through the sort of maybe the exploratory testing cases that we weren't comfortable automating or we didn't want to automate. And then it's up to us to have a discussion about whether that's ready for release, and that's when the code review and stuff will happen as well. So yeah, we definitely, there's still definitely a place for exploratory and manual testing, even with all these process improvements. If you're asking about process improvements for manual testing, I'm not entirely sure on that one. But
yeah, I was going to say, I wonder if there's any similar thinking you could apply to ensuring you're getting maximum value out of the exploratory testing that you are doing, like having a way, I don't know, some form of metrics to evaluate it might be useful too, but I don't know if that's something we can just quickly come up with on the spot here, but it is an interesting question as well. And I think you were trying to get this point across, is that you gave some examples of ways to think about continuous improvement in what a team is doing, but I think that continuous improvement, the same principles would apply to like anything you're doing, even outside of work, right? So
yeah, and that's the problem with getting. I was trying to advocate for 3 C's for so long in different teams that I now even think about it when it comes to my day-to-day life, which is quite
making dinner or
how to improve this dinner making process. But yeah,
I'm not gonna lie, I've done like a retro on my personal life sometimes on like New Year's Eve. You can totally use work ideas in your personal life.
Yeah, it's the same thing. Like, so actually we often used our retro discussions to feed our 3Cs board. So obviously retros sometimes turn into people having a rant, having a moan, not enjoying. But also you got to promote the good stuff as well. But some of the things that people talk about in retros can just be added straight to that 3Cs board and then spoken about maybe at a later date about how you can improve that. It makes retros more valuable, in my opinion, from what I've seen.
Yeah, I was thinking that too when you were discussing that idea that you at a retro could look at your 3Cs board and assess like which of these improvements have had an impact or not. And yeah. It looks like there's another question in the chat about, I guess, CI/CD technologies, comparing, contrasting the ones that are offered with Azure versus AWS versus Google Cloud. I don't know if you have worked with a lot of different options and would be able to comment on that, but yeah, I think someone was interested in hearing a little bit on that topic.
So I think the concepts remain the same. So all that would maybe not all that would change, I don't want to go that far, but what would change if you're deploying to Azure or AWS or GCP would maybe be like, obviously your integration test would have to change because you're hitting something in AWS compared to Azure. Your Terraform code would have to change as well, but the actual fundamental, the concepts, they shouldn't have to change that much. Obviously, most of the tools, like if you're using GitLab CI or what else, TeamCity or Jenkins or tools like that, that a lot of the concepts, like I said, would remain the same, and you can use those tools for all. The only difference you might have is, I know AWS, for example, and it's only Azure as well. They have their own pipeline options. So I would imagine, well, I'm fairly confident that if you're using an AWS CI/CD tool, it's not going to let you deploy to GCP. But yeah, apart from that, I think the main answer is that they will all follow the same concepts. It's just a different sort of target at the end of it.
Makes sense. Any other topics that people want to get into? Well, we've still got Ali here for a few more minutes.
I've shared a couple of links. I shared the Terraform training labs and just some documentation from GitLab. Not that I'm massively, I'm not promoting GitLab in any way. It's just they have some good documentation on CI/CD concepts. And I know they have a free tier if you do want to play about with CI/CD, because I know that a lot of the tools, they all do the same thing really, just in different ways. So it's really, for me, that's what I try to get across. It's really important to learn about the concepts and the practices behind it so that you can apply that no matter which tool you're using or which cloud platform you're deploying to.
Good advice. Any final topics? Feel free to come off mute as well if you want to join the live conversation.
Hi, this is Saima. I have one question posted. Are there any good DevOps tools? And if there, so how we can connect them to the CI/CD DevOps model?
What tool? No, not what tool. What am I trying to ask here? Which problem are you trying to solve with when you say DevOps tool? What type of thing do you mean?
Like I just want to just get information about it. Like if like for using that model, can we use any tool or like it's a process which
I think so.
Like for the DevOps process model, can we use any tool to implement that model?
Yeah, without knowing the ins and outs of like every CI/CD tool, I would say that most tools and most platforms seem to be moving in the direction of supporting loads of different tools. So you might have like your CI/CD platform on GitLab, for example. You might have a monitoring tool, even using like your cloud provider, or I'll try to think of another monitoring tool like Prometheus or something like that. But you might also, basically what I'm trying to say is that the CI/CD platform, from what I've seen, shouldn't limit what other tools you choose to implement that DevOps model. There shouldn't be that many limitations there. So it depends what else you're trying to do. Like if you're trying to run tests on JMeter, for example, I would imagine that 90% of CI/CD tools would be able to connect with JMeter really easily and get results from JMeter. Same with your whatever you're using to write your automated tests. It would be a command. If you can run it via command line, it'd be able to run on any CI/CD tool. So that covers off a couple of sections of the DevOps diagram. Hopefully that answers your question. I'm not sure.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think Chris
Anyone
summarized
else?
it better than me.
All right, well, I guess we're just about at the end of our time anyways, and it looks like the questions are winding down. So thanks again, Ali, for sharing your valuable insights. This has been great. As I said, I'm taking away a page full of notes to think more about after this presentation, and it sounds like lots of other people are too. And thanks to all of you who came out today to participate in this session. It's great to have a good crowd out, and look forward to hopefully seeing you at more virtual events in the future. Have a great afternoon, everyone.